Hello, and welcome to Toronto Speech Analytics Pays Off, a one-to-one media Take 30 webcast sponsored by Verint. I'm Mila D'Antonio, Editor-in-Chief of 101 Media, and your moderator for today's event. Today's speaker is Heather Callahan, Toronto's Manager of Information and Business at 311 Toronto. Heather is currently involved in the development of the Speech Analytics program to offer the City of Toronto better insights into the voice of its constituents. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Before I review the agenda, let's go over some logistics. If you have a question for Heather, please click on the red Q&A icon. If you encounter any technical issues with the system, please click on the gold question mark for a list of FAQs. Please turn off your pop-up blockers because there will be a survey during the Q&A and we'd like you to participate. All attendees will receive an email with a link to the archived version of this webcast. Finally, if you're tweeting, our Twitter hashtag for this webinar is 121media. Let's move on to today's agenda. Heather will discuss how the City of Toronto is using speech analytics within its 311 contact center to improve quality and service and drive process improvement. She'll offer tips for capturing and understanding the voice of the customer. She'll explain ways for using measurement techniques to help attain real ROI and how to use speech analytics and how the City of Toronto has used it to set itself apart from most other cities in providing enhanced constituent relationships. This webcast will also be followed by a Q&A and a post-event survey. So let's get started. Everyone knows that listening to customers is important to understanding their needs and developing the right engagement strategies, but multiple touch points into an organization often make that understanding complex. So imagine how enormous those complexities would be if you were operating 9 contact centers across 26 locations. That's what the City of Toronto was facing until a few years ago when then Mayor David Miller mandated the consolidation of all those operations. So Heather, can you describe to our audience what inefficiencies were occurring at that time during the mandate and what sort of undertaking was involved in consolidating these centers? Where did you start in the process and how agents were affected?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So prior to the launch of 301 Toronto, we had about 250 inquiry lines, over 1,000 blue page listings, and about 300 web directories. So citizens did not know who to call if they had questions about the city. If you called one of our 9 contact centers, depending on your question, you may have to be transferred. If you had more than one type of question, you may have to be transferred to two or three separate individuals. So, for example, if you wanted to know the hours of the library and when your garbage was going to be picked up, you'd have to speak to 2 different people in 2 different offices. So in 2009, in response to improvements for customer service, we launched 301 Toronto. And it was not only a consolidation of contact centers, but it gave us the opportunity to change our business processes, review our business processes across many different departments, make service improvements, review our service standards. One of the first steps that we did was actually creating a knowledge base. So we went out into different departments and met with people, and we took all that information that people have in their heads, and those people who've been with the organization for 25 plus years, and they're the go-to guy for all of your questions. And we got everything that was on paper and in multiple databases, and we brought it all together in one searchable place that both the agents and then the customers use now online. So those are some of the efficiencies that we started looking at.
Wow. How long did that process take from beginning to end?
It took about maybe 3 years. We first started our strategy in about 2005 with starting to look at our plan and went out and looked at a number of different contact centers. And then we launched in 2009. So, between 3 or 4 years by the time we actually launched from the start of the project.
Wow. So, throughout that time, I'm sure the consolidation also included the adoption of many new technologies. I know one of those being the speech analytics platform. Speech analytics and big data go hand in hand. So, can you talk to the audience about what your big data goals were when you were aiming to adopt the speech analytics platform?
So we currently manage approximately 1.5 million transactions a year. So during each of those transactions, our customers generally ask about 3 or more questions per transaction. We record 100% of all of our calls. So when you start to pull all of that information together, it results in a lot of big data that you capture. And you don't necessarily have time or the resources to analyze. So speech analytics allowed us to be able to analyze that data consistently and without the need for additional resources. So one of the things that we wanted to achieve with speech analytics was in the beginning was understanding why our customers were calling us. So we tend to have customers fall into 2 categories. One is general inquiry and one is service request. So our general inquiry group is about 70% and our service request is about 30%. And we had service request is when someone comes to us and says they would like a staff person to go out and do something. So for example, filling a pothole could be a service request. We have excellent statistics on our service requests, but we have very little statistics on our general inquiry. So 70% of our business we don't really know a lot about. And so we were hoping that by using speech analytics, that was going to be able to help us uncover why people were calling us from a general inquiry perspective.
I see. And Heather, can you further explain how the speech analytics is also helping you to understand voice of the customer today, and what data points are you analyzing, and what are the action plans you have in place to act on the insights that you collect?
So one of the first things that we did when we began using speech analytics is a little bit contrary to other people when they first start practicing speech analytics, because usually you want to create a specific category. But what we did was we created this large category, and it was called general inquiry. And this was allowing us to take all of our calls and put them into one big bucket and start to understand what it was people were calling us about. So we started analyzing and looking at that big bucket. That then allowed us to be able to take that large category and then begin to create smaller categories for our business drivers to see what it was that our customers were interested in, asking about, needed help with, whatnot. And so we use speech analytics to get our customer insights. We use it a lot for improving our quality management, so we use it as a partnership with our quality management. It also helps us identify some of our pain points or our customers' pain points, and it gives us opportunities for reducing our costs and eliminating our efficiencies. So one of the valuable lessons that we learned when we were doing speech analytics was the value of acting on some of your insights. A lot of people were, when I went out and I started listening to people talk about speech analytics, either when I was in the process of getting it or shortly after we got it, you go out and you hear about these studies and start talk about return on investment and whatnot. And one of the things that we learned is that if you can't just find the study and start identifying all these things that you want to look at. You actually have to go and engage in the study so you can really realize the opportunity. Otherwise, you don't see any of your return on investment. And that's, I think, one of the hardest lessons that anybody that I've spoken to who's also, engaged in speech, that's one of the hardest lessons that people have. Because you get very distracted. Once you start, you'll find people from all different departments and whatnot are coming to you with these great speech studies that they want to do and, all these things that they're interested about, and you can get distracted by that. But really you want to complete the study, the interests that you're interested in yourself, but you have to stay focused. So one of the things that we did that helped us stay focused is we created a governance structure. And so we report regularly to our governance group, and so we talk about studies that we have interest in doing. We talk about studies that people have requested of us, and the governance group helps us decide where we're going to focus and what studies we're actually going to engage in.
I see. And Heather, can you provide any examples of how you or your team have acted on the insights collected, and also share how the adoption of speech analytics have affected agents' roles and responsibilities?
So there's always lots of great examples. So one of the ones that we did was we have a policy where we are required, if someone calls 301 and we have to transfer them to another department, one of the things that we require is we do a warm transfer, which means people have to stay on the line, the agents have to stay on the line and connect the two parties together and let the other party know why the customer is calling and whatnot. And so, it's a very good for customer service, it's very good practice, whatnot. And so one of the things that we found when we were doing speech, we were in the process of creating one of our categories, and we sort of tripped over this, was we found that the agents had sometimes when they had to do a transfer of a call, they had to transfer into another queue. So it was, business that was at next level. Our agents wouldn't be able to do it, say, detailed tax information. And so we would transfer people into another queue, and our agents were sitting on the line with the customer and waiting. And sometimes they were waiting, depending on the time of day. Sometimes they might be waiting 20 minutes. And so what we found with speech is because the calls, the information on the recording was being repeated, so you would hear things like, please hold while I connect you to your customer. Those kinds of things were being repeated. It was bringing it up in speech, and we were finding it. And when we started looking at it and we realized, this is a policy and we put it in place for a very good reason, but we started to see how much it was costing us. And we realized that, we had to change this policy. So we made a very simple policy change. Didn't cost us anything when it comes to, investing in technology or anything. And we basically said, if there's another queue, rather than you waiting in the queue, we want you to tell the customer, advise the customer that there's another queue, advise them of how long the wait is, give them the phone number, and then transfer them into the queue, or they can call back later. But our agents wouldn't be sitting listening to the same recording, for extended periods of time. And, it was something that we might have known was happening, but until we had speech and it could grab all those calls and put them into one bucket, did we start to realize how much it actually cost us and how large that volume was, and things that you might not necessarily find doing QM.
I see. And did this also entail new training for the agents in order to encourage this follow-up?
So basically we just rolled out a new just a policy for the agent. So it was very limited on, we didn't have to do any training. Very small amount of training. It didn't cost us anything as far as, implementing new technology. So it was, and then we could look at the savings. So I can't recall off the top of my head from a savings perspective, but you can measure before how much it's costing you before. You can implement the small change, and then you can just see how much it costs you after the fact. And that's the one thing about speech that I like, is that you can do those, little study that you look at how much it's costing you before, and you can implement some change, and you can see how much it's costing you after.
Definitely. And speaking of metrics, what are the metrics that you have in place to measure the success and ROI around your customer experience, and more specifically around the speech analytics initiative?
So I'm sort of alluding to that. One of the things I really like about speech analytics is the ability to add that cost per call or cost to serve to your categories and your business drivers. So in the example that I gave you, you could see how we could see beforehand how much it was a particular behavior or type of call was costing the contact center. So, for example, another example is repeat callers or misinformation. So you can identify callers who are calling you back because they received the wrong information the first time they called. You can see how much this is costing your contact center, and then you can make some simple and expensive changes, so training, more effective information, and that can result in being able to reduce or eliminate unnecessary costs. So if it's a call that, especially for misinformation, these are calls that you really don't want to have, and you want to reduce. If you can eliminate, great, but you really want to reduce as much as possible. And being able to use that cost per call or cost to serve tells you how much it's costing you. And I find for us, bringing that back to our governance group, as soon as you can tell someone, this feature is costing you $300,000, or this feature is costing you $1.2 million, everybody's listening, and you don't have to ask for additional resources. Doors are opening because people realize you have a hard ROI as opposed to a soft ROI. So the hard ROI that you can actually measure, and you have some dollars and cents, as opposed to a soft ROI, which is, improved customer service and things that you can't always measure. So what we do is we complete the analysis on the category. We identify an issue, an inefficiency. We determine what it's costing us. Then we identify some measures we could take to change it. We implement the change. If it's not an automated change, we monitor again several times down the road to make sure that it hasn't returned. And then we can use this as an example of a return on our investment. And like I said, it speaks volumes with senior management.
I'm sure. Thanks, Heather. How also is the City of Toronto better off today because of these efforts to consolidate? You spoke about these metrics, but more specifically, can you give examples of how the city is better off?
So today, I think it's much easier to contact the city. We have one single point of contact. We've expanded our service offerings. So we were 8:30 to 4:30 Monday to Friday. Now we're 24/7, 365 days of the year. If you have an issue that happens on a Friday night, so say for example your garbage was missed on Friday night, you don't have to wait until Monday morning to be able to call someone. You can call someone Friday night. You can call someone Friday night at 2 o'clock in the morning when you come home from your evening out. One of the other things that we implemented, we provide service standards so the citizens know what to expect. And we also provide reference numbers so that they could track their service. We also provide this online so they could go online. We have multiple channels. And this can be done, across our email, fax, phone. We have a mobile app. We also offer service in 180 languages using our interpretive service.
It sounds like not only is the city better off, but the individual constituents are definitely better served today because of these capabilities. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, one of the things that I like about speech is that now you can hear your voice of your customer. And it changes how we provide our service. So it's not the service that we think the citizens want. It's the service they're telling us that they want because we can hear what they say. And we take that information and we don't just apply it to 311. We also, bring it back to all the other departments that we're answering calls on behalf of. So we get information and the voice of the customer from our customers who are calling 311, but we also get information about, our city in general and all the other services that are being provided. And hopefully this is being transformed into citizens who are more engaged with their city, more confidence in municipal government, and more transparency within government.
How, it sounds like you've achieved a lot here over the last 3 years. How do you plan to grow this strategy that you have in place?
So 311 was originally built as a phased approach. So the anticipation was always that we would start off at one, with certain divisions and certain services and expand from there. And we started off with certain types of service offerings, and then we continued to grow and phase in new types of services and new channels. So over the past couple of years, we expanded the services that we create, and we increased our channel offerings. So like I said, the phone, fax, email, online. We launched our mobile apps, and we also launched instant messaging the last couple of years. We took many of the customer service improvement initiatives. And this is probably one of the big things that we didn't anticipate when we developed 301, is that we took some of those customer service improvements and we shared them across our organization. So we went beyond just our 301 contact center, and we shared them with others that were providing customer service. We developed customer service standards and training and whatnot for other groups. And so next we're going to be looking at the ability to schedule appointments of various types, join registration, and payment. So those are the things that we're looking at. We're also looking at text analytics so that we can start doing the voice of the customer from across our online processes.
Oh, I see. And how did you share those improvements with the rest of the organization? Was this during regular meetings?
No. So one of the things that we do is we have a report that we call, it's a pulse report, and we create some of these weekly. And the pulse report looks at, some of the trends that have been happening over the past, say, week or so or longer periods of time. And when we listen, what we do is when we capture these statistics, but we also listen to some of the calls and gain some of the insights, and we identify, what's trending and whatnot, and then we share that pulse report. If for example, it was the water department, we would and some of the things that were trending was about water, we would share that with the water department. Things like we've had things, people have difficulty understanding the tax bill. The tax bill needs to be simplified. So that's not something that 311 we don't develop the tax bill, but we will send that information to the people who are responsible for the tax bill and say, this is what your customers are saying about the bill. And so by doing things like that, then they can make changes. And so that's one of the things we do. Another thing we did was we had a training module that we used for all of our agents, and we would have take that module and roll it out through our human resources so that anybody who's providing any level of customer service, any front-facing staff would all get, would go through this training module, customer service training module. So things like that. Any kind of win that we have, we share it across the organization.
That's great. Would you say this level of innovation and collaboration is sort of unique for a government entity?
Well, it's been a change. I remember when we first started, walking around with the idea of 311, and people had not seen it, and they didn't know what it was or what it looked like, and they couldn't really get their head around it. And in the beginning, I really felt like I was a sales agent trying to promote it and get people on board. And then right after we launched, when people could actually now see something, concrete. Then I had a lineup around the block of people who either wanted to integrate with us or, wanted to somehow take advantage of the 311 service.
That's great. Heather, can you offer one piece of advice for our audience or people who are maybe struggling to get momentum for their voice of the customer or speech analytics efforts off the ground?
One of the things that we did in the city, which when we first went out looking, we had a hard time because we're government, and there was very few governments that were using speech analytics, very few cities. And so we had a hard time trying to find, someone who was doing speech as it was for government, because we don't do upsell or any of that kind of thing. And so what we did was when we went to our vendors, Verint and Speech Analytics, when we went to Verint and we said, hey, we can't really get our head around how this looks. We see that it's, it has the potential, but we want to see it. And so Verint brought us to one of the banks so we could actually see a demo. And when we saw it, we got really excited. And what they had at the bank was they had a contract person that they'd brought in who kind of helped them set up their speech and their governance structure and train their staff. And they would tell us stories about how it really worked for them and whatnot. And that was one of the things that we decided to do. And it worked out so well for us that we ended up renewing the contract for a second year. So we had somebody with us for 2 years who, really helped us set up our categories, and trained all of our staff and supported our staff, taught us, all the ins and outs, and really helped us stay on track. And so that's one of the big things for us that really worked out well. And it was worth the investment.
Great. Definitely. I have one more question. You mentioned you're looking into text analytics right now. Is the goal with that, once that goes live, would be to integrate that data with your current speech analytics efforts?
Yes, because for us, we usually have customers who tend to go with one channel, but that isn't always the case. So, it would be nice to take all of our channels and be able to look at all of our channels together, because it is the voice of your customers regardless of how they're contacting you. So, we'd like to be able to integrate that in with speech. It's just another way of people contacting us and what they're saying. Although I do find we haven't done text analytics yet. We're just sort of looking at it, but we've done a little bit of sample. And right now, just in the little sample data that we've done, it does look like people. It's a different voice from the customer. I find, and I don't know how much this is because I haven't really had enough exposure to it, but it almost seems to be that the people who call you, it's the things that they're going to say to you. But when you do text analytics, it's the things that they may not necessarily say to you. They may say it about you. So I find right now it's seeming to be a little bit different customers. So that should be interesting for us. to hear things that people don't say to us when they call us on the phone.
Definitely, that's definitely interesting and it's probably complex to decipher though. So, well, thank you so much, Heather. I think it's time to kick off our Q&A session next. So first, a few reminders. If you'd like a PDF copy of this deck, click the green resource widget at the bottom of your screen. If you missed any part of the presentation or would like to see it again, all attendees will receive an email with a link to the archived version. I'd like to remind everyone about this survey that's going to be posted during this next Q&A period. So please take a moment to participate, and you'll need to turn off your pop-up blockers to enable the survey. So if you have a question for Heather, you can post that now. And again, click the red Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen. If we don't get to your question, we'll email you a response after this webinar. So let's see. Anthony has a question. How was voice of the customer measured by speech analytics? Is it via emotion detection? If yes, how accurate was it?
So one of the things that we find with speech is that you create categories that have words that are words that are associated with your business driver that you're interested in, and those words bring back the calls where those words appear. So even though you have the technology that brings back these, I always call them buckets. So you'll have different buckets of topics that you may be interested in. So for example, if I wanted a garbage bucket, I would use any words potentially associated with garbage, and you test your category to see that it's how strong it is and if it works. But one of the things that I didn't realize before we got speech is that it doesn't matter how great the technology is, you still have to listen to some of those calls. So when you start creating your category, you'll listen to some calls and make sure that the words you're choosing are accurate. And then afterwards, when you've done your have your bucket and you have your bucket of calls, you'll listen to a percentage of calls, and so you'll see what people are saying. And we do a little analysis, a little chart that talks about how many, like what's coming up from what customers are saying and how many times they're saying it, even within that category. And so a lot of times, this will give you what it is that your customers are saying. It doesn't avoid having to listen to calls, but it's amazing how much it just organizes what you're going to listen to, and it reduces the number of calls that you have to listen to. So we found even in some of our large categories, we'll listen to, say, the first maybe 40 or 50 calls, and you don't have to listen to the whole thing because you do have the transcription, so you get the gist of from the words of what people are actually saying. But you find very quickly that it's the same thing being said within that 50 calls that you listen to. You have a good idea of what people are saying, and so that helps you understand in that category what your voice of your customer is. And then the nice part is that now you can associate cost to it.
Right, and like you said, it helps to prioritize as well.
And that's part of that we use for our QM. So in QM, normally you're listening to less than 1% of your calls if you do traditional QM, and that doesn't necessarily give you. With this, it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. But with speech analytics, it helps narrow down those things that you want to listen to. It also helps you find things that you didn't know were there.
Makes sense. Well, thanks, Heather, and thanks to everyone for joining us today, but unfortunately we're out of time. We will address any unanswered questions via email. So this concludes Toronto Speech Analytics Pays Off, a one-to-one media Take 30 webcast sponsored by Verint. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for attending and have a great day.